Hello and a very warm welcome to each one of you joining in from many different time zones. This is the first in series of the webinars being planned from Thomas Bell-Wright. I hope that wherever you are, you and your friends and families and people in your community are safe and healthy. I will be force muting everybody's mics in case someone by mistake unmutes them. I guess a lot of you who have been attending webinars would be familiar with how this goes around, but here are some quick ground rules for everybody. It is recommended and advised that you keep your mics muted in order to avoid any interference. The meeting will be recorded, and in case you want a copy of the recording, you can request by sending us an email at meeting@bell-wright.com. There is a feature of polls, which I am going to be using through the course of the conversation and through the course of the webinar. So wherever you would see this
on this webinar, so is it them or me?
All right, thanks for your help.
I have been involved in many standard committees, etc. A quick introduction about Thomas Bell-Wright International Consultants. We have been in the region for 25 years. We started off as a curtain wall testing laboratory offering air water infiltration tests. We moved on from there to offer fire tests. We started offering fire tests by adding a furnace and a Steiner tunnel. We continued to add more and more capabilities. So we now offer fire reaction to fire tests and fire propagation tests for cladding material and cladding systems. In case any participant cannot hear me, you are most welcome to type in your questions in or your thoughts or queries in the chat box. I am guessing that you are all familiar with the controls. Please raise a flag in case you are having difficulties in listening to me or so. If I don't have any feedback from any of you, I am guessing that all of you can hear me. So I'm going to start off to test the poll feature so that you understand how this poll feature is going to run along through the course of this presentation. A lot of you might get a poll directly on your screen. Some of you may be asked to take the poll. This is almost like a trial session for all those who may not have used a poll feature during a webinar. for you to understand how the pole works. So please go ahead and answer the questions coming on your screen. This is almost like a trial session, as I said. Going forward, we will be having more of these questions coming across on your screens so that I understand the perspective that most of you are from. Usually these polls are timed, so a minute or a minute and a half, sometimes 2 minutes is the duration for which this poll will remain open. For those of you who have joined in a little later, just continuing and completing, Thomas Bell-Wright International Consultants has been around for 25 years, starting off more as a curtain ball test laboratory. And in the last decade, we have been expanding in fire testing as a facility, starting to offer resistance to fire tests through one furnace and then adding on more and more furnaces and more capabilities. As on date, we have a full-fledged reaction to fire laboratory in our facility. We can test as per the American standards as well as the European standards. The same goes for fire propagation tests. We are probably the only laboratory in the world that can do a fire propagation test as per the British standard as well as the American standard. I believe all of you would have answered the questions which came up on your screen. So thank you so much for participating in this first poll and getting an idea of how this poll operates. Moving on, I will be straight away jumping into the topic of cladding and cladding fires. A lot of us are familiar with this challenge that has been in front of a lot of people in a lot of jurisdictions across the world. We have been involved with several stakeholders in the industry who are related to cladding, whether it is manufacturers of materials, whether it is contractors, whether it is consultants, whether it is regulators, and so on and so forth. We supported the industry on the four-pronged problem that arose. The problem was for the existing buildings, of course, and the problem was for the new buildings. For the existing buildings, we supported the development of a tool which was developed by Nfpa from the United States. The tool was an offering that helped people in the industry, building owners, to assess the risk of their existing buildings. We supported the UAE civil defense in enhancing their fire and life safety code. They came up with very detailed requirements for ensuring that cladding material being installed in new buildings is safer. We also launched our own certification program. We became an accredited certification body in order to enable people across the industry comply to the UAE Fire and Life Safety Code of Practice. We supported several R&D projects. Here you would see a small video clip on the left bottom screen. This is a system which is a retrofit solution developed by Johnson Controls. It is a system that can automatically detect a fire on the building exterior and control this fire through a suppression system. With this as a background about us, I'm going to jump in and talk about risk. And there is lots and lots of risks in the construction industry. And as we talk very specific to risk related to facade fires, I'm going to touch upon some things which are very basic to the complete construction process. This basic is the concept related to procurement or selection of what we buy. Now, irrespective of the function that we may be as an architect, as a contractor, as a consultant, as a manufacturer of materials, or a regulator, we are all buyers in some or the other sense as human beings. Now, as buyers, we buy everything and anything that we require. This ranges from electrical appliances for our homes. This ranges right up to products that we may require for our organizations and so on and so forth. Let me quickly open another poll so that I understand that if any of us or all of us who have been buyers, what are the kind of situations that we have been in those cases where we bought or purchased something which was not up to the mark. I would request all of you to open the poll screens. You would get a polling screen or a request to answer the poll. And it would be very, very helpful for me to get an idea from each one of you. I know a lot of you are in different jurisdictions, different time zones, but this can give a very fair idea about your understanding of how a buying process goes. A lot of us are familiar with the fact that jurisdictions have a very good mechanism for several kinds of products which are considered high risk for us. You will see some graphs and some data on your screens. This is data that I have collected from a third-party body called SGS. You would notice that the bottom graph or bottom line on the graph talks about toys, which means this lists the total number of product recalls in the electrical and electronic segment. And a good percentage of these products, as you would see, which are recalled because they pose a threat to human life. Now, for those who may not be familiar with product recall as a concept, many jurisdictions in the world have mandatory government laws which push manufacturers or suppliers to recall products that can pose a threat to life of anybody. So there is a system in place, which is a product recall. I guess a lot of you would be familiar with product recalls, as the automotive industry and the consumer electronics industry has been rolling out many international product recalls. The Samsung Note was a classic case, but it continues across in terms of batteries being recalled, car parts being recalled, and so on and so forth. I have a few seconds left for you to complete the poll, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results of the poll to be completed. So that's fantastic. I would love for you to see what the answers are. I believe all of you or some of you can see the answers on your screen of how people have responded to this poll. So moving forward, we believe that you understand how product recalls operate, but have any of you ever wondered how a concept of product recall can work when it comes to the construction industry? In the construction industry, once a product has been installed or used to construct a building, specifically a facade or any other part of the building, it is almost impossible to recall it in the manner and functionality that consumer electronic products are recalled. And this situation that you cannot really recall products in the construction industry has a very big repercussion. This forms a basis of the biggest risk when it comes to the potential of many different scenarios that can happen for any stakeholder in the complete construction process. Fires being one of many. but there are several risks. And depending on the jurisdiction and the legal framework that you sit in as a supplier, as a developer, as a contractor, you could come up with different kinds of risks. Now, all of these risks then eventually convert into potential risks and potential liabilities for several stakeholders. I'm going to talk you through with an example of the fire risk in cladding and what the industry has been missing out, and how what the industry has been missing out is being filled in by various tools around the world. I will take an example of the building envelope from the time when the elevation is visualized to the time the building envelope is commissioned. Now, obviously, there are lots of steps involved. Many of these have been analyzed as part of the risk assessments and evaluations that have been done to investigate many accidents in the building envelope and facade space that happened around the world, ranging from analysis in the Grenfell tragedy right up to the analysis and the cases that resulted in decisions across into Australia and all along in the middle. Now, I'm going to pick out 4 specific areas, and these 4 specific areas are areas which have been almost reported or picked up in all these analyses. These are areas which have had lags in the way the construction industry has operated, and these are areas that have led to liabilities coming across almost all stakeholders of the facade installation process. It starts with understanding that what is the property or the reaction to fire property of material. A lot of people assumed their understanding of several parameters, whether we are talking of ignitability, combustibility, flame spread, and so on and so forth. For the purpose of this workshop, I am avoiding getting into test methods numbers, standard numbers, because the range and the spread of people who have joined in the webinar are from several jurisdictions who would vary in the local requirement and the local regulations that they may have. But the underlying theme remains very, very common and constant, is that for a cladding system to be designed to be fire safe, the basic building block is that the reaction to fire properties of each constituent materials should be known. And the next is that when a cladding system has been designed or has been put together, it should be known and understood that there is a system behavior or a resultant property. To give you context of this concept, let us assume that we have an aluminum composite panel or a metal composite panel cladding system, which consists of an ACP. It consists of an insulation system. It consists of weather barriers. It consists of a few more elements like fixing mechanisms, fasteners, etc. And this as a system, if for the purpose of discussion we only assume 4 components, though there are many others, we know that the variables are the properties or reaction to fire properties of the ACP, the reaction to fire properties of the insulation material, and the weather barrier and the connection systems. But in reality, there is a evolved system property or the system behavior, depending on the air gaps, depending on how the design has been built. The whole system would behave differently when it comes to the system coming under the attack of a fire. A related situation is once a system has been designed, keeping in mind the properties of materials, keeping in mind that there is a system behavior, there is a challenge related to how to ensure that the materials that have reached the construction site are exactly what were designed. And Of course, with everything being in place, how do you really verify and validate that the installations are being done as per what is understood to be a safe system? Now, I'm going to talk about these four factors that come in and how they affect liability for several stakeholders. Now, before I jump into that, let me get a quick idea. I'm going to run another poll to understand where each one of you are coming from. So I've just opened another poll very quickly. I would like you to get your clickers in place and answer the question for me to get a fair idea of what is your role as someone who is listening to this webinar. For the purpose of the webinar, I will be interchangeably using the words facade and cladding or building envelope. Of course, there are several interpretations related to it. I see the answers coming in, and I see quite a few who are still answering the question. So I will let you finish the poll. It's good to see a good percentage of fire consultants who are logged in. And pardon me for not going into a lot of details of test methods and test standards. I would take questions towards the end of the session, and maybe we can talk specifics if you feel the requirement. And let those last 15, 20 people try to punch in their answers so that I can continue talking about the tools that we will be discussing related to the liability. Now, it must be understood that when it comes to liability related to the construction or the construction contracts is very, very much dependent on the jurisdiction that we are in. A good number of you have responded, so thank you very, very much for the responses. It's a very good idea to understand where the audience is and what they think and where they are. So the liability can vary among different stakeholders. There are several stakeholders, and for the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to talk about these 5 stakeholders. And the liability is usually a function of how the regulation is there in the country. Well, the regulation, which is, for example, on the screen, you can see 2 snippets. There is a regulation which empowers the civil defense in the UAE. And of course, the regulations in several countries, including the United Kingdom, have been changing and will probably change post the tragedies and the analysis of the tragedies. But in for the purpose of this webinar, there are 2 sets of potential sources of liability. One being legal, which is what is the law of the land, what is the requirement in the country that could lead you to be penalized in the court of law. And a related is the contract. And the contract is very, very powerful from a standpoint that the contract is one segment or one section which can empower each one of you to define your liability or define the liability of the contractee so that you ensure that the liability is defined. And in cases that you want to shy from taking on the responsibility of certain aspects, then these are some of the tools that can help you define what these liabilities are. I'm going to talk about these 4 tools that you may or may be familiar with or may have used. a basic and a core element that has been used when it comes to procurement is what we all understand to be a test report. A test report is often understood as a proof of how a given material is behaving or can behave. And traditionally, this has been the tool for having all sorts of faith when it comes to material suppliers supplying or proposing to supply materials. Often, a material supplier would give a product brochure which would have some level of claim that their products behave in a specific way. And often, this is backed by test reports. Now, several countries, several jurisdictions have now moved on to a concept of certification and listing. And I would like to draw the attention of each one of you to a very basic point of why this shift has happened or has been happening. A test report is something, a document which defines how a specific material behaved in the context of a specific test environment and reports the result. But it does not in any way define how many tests were undertaken before that test which resulted in the test results which are declared or shared. Neither does the test report link the supply of the material to be done in the construction site on a forward contract with the results of the test. And this is what has been used as a gap. And the concept of certification and listing, which may be known to a lot of you already, fills in this gap to as much as possible. Certification bodies, who are typically accredited by third-party accreditation bodies, certification bodies take on the role of going and visiting to manufacturers and checking how a sample is being manufactured and typically signing off with a mark or a marking to define traceability. And once this is done, the sample where the traceability has been established is tested. And once the test results are positive, and this could be more than one iteration, then the certification body goes back to the factory regularly, and as a part of the audit mechanism, they would continue to audit the quality and the production control mechanisms, all the processes that ensure that there is repeatability of production. And what this results is in a certification and listing. And a certification and a listing is not just a certificate that can be shown around. It is a listing in the form of a live document which is available to be verified on the web portal of the certification body. The certification body is supposed to publish this. Long ago, and maybe till now as well, the Red Book was published in the UK as a certification proof. Now, several certification bodies around the world have resorted to an online listing where not only can you verify the product which has been tested and is demonstrating compliance to a specific set of standards, it also lists the manufacturing facility, and it gives a traceability or a certification number which can be verified when the product or the material is supplied to the construction site. Now, this is very, very important to understand, as this is the tool. This is the tool which can be specified. This is the tool which needs to be used by various stakeholders to ensure that products and materials that have been specified are the products and materials that are received on the construction site. And the certification and listing provides this feedback loop. In several cases where system tests are performed, certification bodies often also list general drawings of the configuration in which the system has been tested. Now I'm going to open another quick poll to all of you. I want feedback from you to understand how many of you have been aware of certification and listing as a concept. How many of you would have actually used a certificate or a certification and listing to verify the materials that are written in specifications, or to verify the materials that have been received on the construction site? I will let you answer, because this is, in my opinion, a very, very interesting learning that has been happening around the world in the construction industry specifically. That is, not only to use the certification and listing as a concept to write technical specifications, but certification and listing as a concept for inspection and verification of materials that have been received at the construction site. I would urge all of you to look up the poll button in your screens and answer this question. I still have maybe another 25 seconds left for all those participants who have not yet punched in their answers. I would love to see the answers from all of you. And for anybody who has punched in saying that they were not aware of certification and listing as a concept, I am very, very happy that you are attending this webinar wherein you understand that this tool exists and is available for everybody to be used. So that closes the poll. I see a good set of answers, a very, very good mix coming in. A lot of people are understanding that this concept exists. So I'm glad that I'm sharing this. Now that we are aware that we know how to ensure that the products which are being designed exist and can have a traceability, let us try and attack the situation which has been arising everywhere. People who are from the facade industry, people who are in the cladding world, know that it is very normal for any given facade system to have hundreds of drawings, if not in some rare cases even thousands. And what these drawings do is that they capture an extremely large number of details that possibly exist and do exist when it comes to cladding systems and cladding designs. Now, this is another area where a potential liability can arise. And it is extremely critical and important that the correct stakeholder with the correct understanding is given the responsibility, and the stakeholders use the right tools to mitigate their potential risk. In a typical scenario, hundreds of drawings are reviewed down and narrowed down to a very few where potentially combustible materials are there as part of the systems, and the design element of the cladding system is used to decrease the risk that is caused because of combustible or materials which are prone to ignition. I must put this in place that facade systems, cladding systems, are prone to having materials which will catch fire or can catch fire. Because if we do not use these materials, we may not be able to achieve some of those properties which are now required. But without delving into that segment, I'm going to move forward and talk to you about the large-scale fire propagation tests that are available and are used to test one or maybe several instances of designs of cladding systems where there is a potential risk of a fire that can happen. On the top you would see a video of the Nfpa 285 test. This is an American large-scale fire propagation test. There are close to 15 or 20 large-scale fire propagation tests that are used by jurisdictions around the world, several in Europe, few in North America, and so on and so forth. But the Nfpa 285 test and the BS 8414 are among the more commonly used ones in the world. The Nfpa 285 test, as you can see on your screen, the videos are also running and showing a mock of the test happening. The Nfpa 285 test uses a gas-fired room burner, a burner on the ground floor, as you can see on the right side of your screen, and a window burner. They together create what is called a leapfrog effect, or they simulate the leapfrog effect. And a similar test or a similar scenario is created, similar in intent, by the British standard. The British standard uses a wooden crib and has a L-shaped wing as well. And it is a very time-consuming debate if someone asks me to compare these two test methods. They are comparable in intent, and they are, of course, comparable in content as well, and how they currently different systems would perform when they are put in front of the test. I can only add to say that we have tested systems which have passed one test and failed the other, as well as vice versa, which may come across as a bit worrying to people, but in reality, people who understand these large-scale fire propagation tests should be able to use the correct test and the results appropriately. I'm going to ask another poll question before I move to the next step, is to understand how many of you who would have probably witnessed some of these tests are there in the audience, and what is your understanding of these tests, so that we know how the audience perceives these tests, because these tests typically replicate a system or a section of a cladding system in a very unique test environment, and it is almost impossible to replicate the complete building facade and the complete set of risks that exist in any of the several buildings in a single test or even a set of tests. So it requires a fair bit of understanding and decoding among the stakeholders of people who conduct these tests, do these tests, use these test reports to correctly interpret these test reports. Some of the questions in the poll, you can click on more than one answer, as you have been seeing. The time which I'm going to give for people to answer these questions, I'm going to bring your attention to some of the red dots that you may have seen in the screens before. There is a standard which is written called ISO 17025. Similarly, you may have seen another standard on some of the screens called ISO 17065. These are not test standards. These are standards which are used to evaluate and bring at par testing laboratories as well as certification bodies in what they do and how they perform their function. It is important that when you are choosing a testing laboratory, a certification and listing body, you know and understand the relevance of these standards so that you are choosing the right authority and the right body who is considered as capable in performing their functions. So I'm going to give another 5 seconds before I'm going to close this poll. And in case any of you feel that this is a poll where you would like to see how the audience has responded, I would love to share the results. Do you think you would like to see the results? Any answers in the chat box? Moving forward, you must have had a quick peek at the results. Moving forward is the last point, which is equally important as others, which is inspections. We know that we have the right tools now to assess and ensure that the products, the materials which are being used, let's say to design the facade system, have a tool to go and check back that yes, it is the correct product that was not only prescribed and ordered, but also inspected at the construction site, that the correct order from the correct manufacturing location was received. You have a mechanism to evaluate the risk of 1 or 10 of the most riskiest sections of the cladding system by conducting one or several tests that need to be done. And now we must understand that whatever we believe is appropriate is the way it is getting installed on the construction site. On the screen, you may see some potentially disturbing images. These are images of inspections that have been done on the site. You can see some of the images which show bits and pieces of ACP material being used to, maybe you can see here, bits and pieces of ACP material being used on just to fix things. So it is very, very critical and very, very important that the inspections are done through the course of the installation and to ensure and check that whatever has been approved, whatever we believe is correct, is how materials are installed. ISO 17020 is the standard which helps people selecting inspection bodies choose and bring them at par and ensure that there is an independent check for the inspection body of someone who is evaluating them to be independent and capable of conducting the inspections. So I would like to close with a final slide which summarizes these tools which are available to all of us. By a summary slide, I'm summarizing an overview mechanism which is followed now by several codes in the world as a process or a method to ensure the mitigation of risk. When the system is designed, a risk assessment is being conducted wherein fire consultant or consultants, facade specialists, contractors, some of them or all of them are given the responsibility as well as the liability of checking and ensuring that the system is designed using the correct materials. The concept of certification and listing is used in contracts and technical specifications to ensure that what is being specified, it is being specified correctly. A set of assembly tests or one is conducted to validate and check the potential risk that may exist in some systems when they are designed. And while the installation is being conducted, there is an inspection that is conducted in parallel, and the inspection body is authorized to do this. So this is a summary slide, and I'm going to open the last poll question to all of you to get your current understanding of who is responsible / who is liable when it comes to potential risks that are arising. And I'm going to leave you with this screen which lists the standards which help you understand an inspection body, a testing body, and a certification and listing body, but how they are at par or not. And in the meantime, you can type in, I believe you should be able to use the chat screen to type in any specific questions that you have. I already have a few questions that are coming in, but I would love to see any more questions that you would probably want to write in that you would want me to take up now. I seem to have overshot my prediction of completing the workshop in 30 minutes and taking another 15 minutes for answering some of the questions. But it's good to get the answers of people. I hope the answers are not such that the architects are wanting to select the consultant, contractor, material supplier, or the owner to have the responsibility, and each one trying to find the other. So the last 10 seconds for the questions, for the poll to close. All right, then I'm going to be closing the poll and sharing with you some of the responses, and any questions that you would like to add in, please go ahead. You are also free to send me an email and write these questions. And I am going to take a few seconds to just scroll through some of the questions that have been coming in. So I'm going to be taking a select questions, maybe 3 total questions across many that I have been receiving. And some of the other questions I will be replying later on through the course of by emails probably. So the first question, which of course pops up a lot, and I see this question coming up from several people, which is related to the large-scale fire propagation tests and how these tests should be correctly interpreted. Now, large-scale fire propagation tests are tests which are almost a kind of checking the design concept. It can never take place, and it can never make sure that all the designs, all the design details get replicated, and this is where the risk assessment comes in. And the risk assessment needs to be done to select one or maybe a few designs that probably require to be tested in a full-scale fire propagation test. I'm going to take another question of people wanting me to compare the 2 large-scale tests. Well, they are not exactly comparable. They are tests. They come from different ideologies and different concepts. So I cannot answer that if there is a straightaway comparison available. Another very good question coming from India is that what is the link between the reaction to fire tests and the large-scale fire propagation tests? Now, this is a good question where the small-scale tests, namely how materials catch fire, so ignitability, combustibility, flame propagation, how the results they give have a direct link with how the large-scale system test will be. But it may not necessarily always connect saying, well, these 3 materials have such and such properties, and they will always pass if they are put together in any configuration. An excellent example is a system that we tested. So a project which was in a given country had undergone a large-scale fire propagation test for the cladding system. The cladding system had a fire retardant, or what is called as Class B material as per the European classification for the ACP. And the material had already been procured, so the system was tested once and failed. 2 times it failed, and the 3rd time the designer was able to come up with a configuration. So they redesigned the system, which means the same set of material were used, and they came up with a system that was able to comply with a large-scale fire propagation test. And these are very critical tests because it relies heavily on the contractor and the overseeing consultant, that they are making sure that the tests, the way it has been tested, the system is the way it will always be installed. I'm going to take one last question regarding the golden thread. This is an excellent question coming in, that how long should the golden thread be maintained? Well, this is kind of out of course for me, because it is something that the jurisdiction needs to arrive at depending on their comprehension of longevity of the infrastructure that is getting constructed. Several countries look at this, several jurisdictions look at this in their own ways. Some would mandate a 10-year performance guarantee to the contractor. Some would then divide the liability and responsibility with the building owners, because beyond a point of time, the buildings are taken care by building owners as well. So no straight answers, sir. And I would now like to close the webinar, and I would like to thank each one of you for spending your valuable time. I know there are lots and lots of questions which have been coming in, and I may not be able to answer all of these questions in this platform on the forum, but I assure you that I am going to reply back to you and touch base with you in an email, and probably one of my colleagues or I can schedule a telephone conversation to answer some of these questions in the coming weeks. So thank you very, very much for spending your time in this. I hope the session was informative. I hope the session was valuable, and we will continue these series of webinars in the times to come. I'm going to send you an email, and I hope I was audible and clear all through the course of the webinar. Thank you very, very much. All of you, stay safe. Bye-bye.